I never came home early. Work had always been my escape, the place where I felt needed and respected. It was my comfort zone, my safe space, where I spent hours surrounded by the hum of phones and the clatter of keyboards. But that day, something inside me shifted. A small voice in the back of my mind told me I should go home, so I listened. It was a rare Thursday when I found myself with a couple of free hours before heading back for the late-night project. The city outside was quiet, still in that in-between time between day and night. I parked my car and stepped out, the air cool and heavy, carrying the scent of rain that hadn't yet come. As I approached the front door of our apartment, I heard it, a sound that made my heart stop. Laughter. It was Sophia's laugh, but not the one I was used to. This was deeper, richer, filled with something that made the hairs on my neck stand up. It was a laugh I had only heard when she was really happy, when she was sharing something that meant more than a simple joke. The sound echoed from inside, mingling with a second voice, one I didn't recognize. I froze with my hand on the doorknob. For a moment, everything seemed to pause. My pulse thudded in my ears as I tried to make sense of what I was hearing. I should have turned around, walked back into the night, and pretended I never heard anything. But I couldn't. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open, slipping inside as quietly as possible. The hallway was dimly lit, the light from the kitchen spilling into the space and casting long shadows. I moved forward, my steps careful, every sound amplified in the silence. Their voices became clearer as I got closer. I peeked around the corner and saw them. Sophia was sitting on the edge of the counter, her legs swinging back and forth, her smile wide as she laughed at something the man next to her said. His hand rested lightly on her back, a touch that seemed too familiar. My chest tightened, my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. I felt as if the room was spinning, the edges of my vision blurring with a mix of shock and anger. Sophia's laughter died as soon as she saw me. Her eyes widened, and for a second, I thought I saw a guilt flash across her face. It was the same look she used to have when she knew she'd done something wrong, something she couldn't hide. But this was different. This was bigger than forgetting to take out the trash or leaving the lights on. This was a betrayal, raw and sharp. The man turned, his face turning from confusion to realization. His eyes met mine, and I felt an instant wave of heat rise up in me, a mix of rage and hurt. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, but my voice was caught in my throat. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Without looking back, I turned and walked out the front door. The night air hit me like a wave, cold and stinging, clearing my head as I stepped away from the place that had once felt like home. I walked down the street, not caring where I was going, the sound of their voices still ringing in my ears, the laughter, the low hum of conversation. Everything felt like a cruel joke I couldn't escape. My heart was pounding, my chest aching with the weight of what I had just seen. I thought about confronting them, about marching back inside and demanding answers, but the thought made me freeze. What would I even say? How would I face her, knowing what I now knew? The questions swirled in my mind, tangled and impossible to answer. All I could do was keep walking, away from the apartment, away from the life that felt shattered in an instant. The street was quiet. The only sound the soft rustle of leaves in the wind and the distant hum of traffic. I kept moving, not sure where I was headed or what I was looking for. I just needed to be far enough away so that the shock could start to fade, so that the weight of betrayal would begin to lift. But it didn't. It stayed with me, heavy and unrelenting. The night felt endless, every step taking me deeper into the unknown. The city around me blurred into the darkness, and I walked on, numb, broken, and asking myself questions I had no answers for. The city lights blurred into a stream of gold and silver as I walked without a destination. My mind was a whirlwind, a storm of anger, confusion, and pain. I didn't know where I was going, and I didn't care. My feet took me down side streets and alleys, past neon signs and storefronts that looked the same as they always did but now felt foreign. Everything felt foreign. The life I thought I had, the love I thought was mine, had been ripped away in seconds. I ended up at a small, run-down cafe near the edge of town. It was open 24/7, a place where people went to forget, to sit alone with their thoughts and coffee that was more bitter than comforting. I pushed open the door, the jingle of the bell above startling me, and walked to the counter. The barista, a young guy with dark hair and tired eyes, nodded at me as I stood there, blankly staring at the menu. I didn't know what I wanted. Coffee? Tea? The words didn't make sense. Coffee. Black, I muttered. The first words I'd spoken since I'd left. He made it quickly and handed it to me with a polite smile that felt like a slap. I paid and sat down at a corner table, wrapping my hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into my frozen fingers. The cafe was empty save for a few late-night workers and a couple of college students huddled over their books, their whispers blending into the soft hum of the machines. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. I didn't want to see who it was, but I couldn't resist. I pulled it out, and my heart dropped when I saw Sophia's name. I didn't answer. The buzzing continued, relentless, until I silenced it. I stared at the screen, wishing I could will the pain away, hoping that the numbness would take over and I wouldn't feel anything anymore. But the pain only deepened, spreading through my chest, tightening around my lungs. I thought about what I had seen, the way her eyes had looked when she saw me. Guilt, fear, a million unspoken words. Why hadn't she told me? Why had she kept a secret? And who was he? The questions spun around in my head, each one sharper than the last. I had always believed we were strong, that the life we built together was real. Now, the weight of doubt pressed down on me, heavier than any burden I'd ever carried. I didn't know how long I sat there, staring at the swirling black liquid in my cup, but suddenly the door opened and a gust of cold air rushed in. I looked up, half expecting to see Sophia standing there, her eyes wide with regret, ready to beg for forgiveness. But it wasn't her. It was a man, older than me, with a worn face and eyes that spoke of a life full of losses and hard lessons. He caught my gaze for a moment, then looked away, choosing a seat by the window where he stared out at the street with a distant look. I turned back to my coffee, taking a sip that burned my throat. The warmth didn't reach the cold part of me, the part that felt betrayed, lost, and afraid of what came next. I needed answers, but the thought of going back to confront Sophia made my skin crawl. I didn't know how to look her in the eye, to ask her why, to hear her voice quiver as she tried to explain away the impossible. The room felt too small, the walls pressing in, suffocating me with my thoughts. The barista came over to wipe down the counter, glancing at me with a hint of curiosity. I met his eyes briefly, and he nodded, as if understanding the weight of what I felt. I didn't know this guy, but in that moment, he seemed like the only one who knew what I was going through. The silence in the cafe deepened, becoming louder than any noise. It was deafening in its own way, a reminder of the loneliness that now surrounded me. What was I supposed to do? Go back and pretend nothing had happened? Leave and never look back? The choices felt as empty as the cafe, the same emptiness that had settled in my chest, that even the strong coffee couldn't chase away. My phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with Sophia's name. I took a deep breath, resisting the urge to answer. My fingers hovered over the screen, torn between the need for her voice and the fear of what it might say. She wanted to talk. I could feel it in my bones, but what was there left to say? Every word between us now would be a lie, a mask over what I had seen. I put the phone down, staring at it until it stopped vibrating. The room was quiet once more, but my mind was anything but. I knew I couldn't stay here forever. I needed to make a choice. I needed to decide what came next, even if it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I left the cafe without a second thought. The weight in my chest hadn't lifted, and the questions only grew heavier with each passing minute. I couldn't sit there forever, trying to drown out the storm inside me. I had to do something. I needed answers, even if I wasn't sure I was ready to hear them. My phone was still buzzing in my pocket, but I ignored it. I knew who it was. Sophia, desperate to reach me, probably terrified of what I had seen. But I couldn't answer her right then. I didn't even know what I would say. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking at the familiar streets I had walked down 1,000 times. Everything felt different now. The world outside seemed unchanged, people going about their day. But to me, it felt like everything had shattered in an instant. My life, my relationship, my trust, all of it seemed to be crumbling. I pulled my coat tighter around myself, the cold air biting at my skin, and started walking. I didn't know where I was going. Maybe I was just trying to outrun the thoughts racing through my mind. Or maybe I was looking for something that could make sense of all the confusion. All I knew was that I had to keep moving. I wandered for hours. The city seemed endless, a blur of faces, cars, and the hum of daily life that felt completely disconnected from my own reality. I kept walking, trying to push everything to the back of my mind, but it was impossible. Every step only reminded me of what I had seen, and each thought seemed to bring up a new wave of anger. How could she do this to me? How could she betray me like this? I thought about going back to the apartment. The thought of facing her again made my stomach twist, but part of me knew I couldn't avoid it. I needed to hear it from her, to hear her explanation, even if I wasn't sure I could believe anything she said. But no matter how much I tried to delay it, the thought of returning to the place that had once felt like home kept pulling me back. Eventually, I found myself standing outside our building, staring up at the apartment window. I had no idea if she was home or if she had gone somewhere else, but I couldn't bring myself to go in. What would I say? How would I even start this conversation? I felt like a stranger to her now, and she to me. I stood there for a while, unsure of what to do. I could hear the distant sound of traffic, the city still awake around me. But all I could focus on was a decision that loomed ahead. Finally, I made up my mind. I was going to talk to her. I needed answers. No more running. With a deep breath, I pushed open the door and walked into the building, the familiar scent of old wood and dust greeting me. The hallway was silent, the walls lined with peeling paint and faded pictures. I walked slowly, each step echoing in the quiet. When I reached the door to our apartment, I paused. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking as I reached for the doorknob. I didn't knock. I didn't know why. I just opened the door. The hinges creaked, and I stepped inside, my eyes immediately searching for her. I found her sitting on the couch, her head down, her shoulders slumped. She looked up when she heard me, her face pale, eyes wide with a mix of fear and guilt. There it was again, that look I had seen earlier when I had walked in on her and that man. She had known I was coming, but she hadn't been ready to face me. I stood there, silent for a moment, unsure of what to say. The room felt heavy, the air thick with tension. Her lips parted, as if she was about to speak, but no words came out. I could see her trying to find the right thing to say, but nothing was going to fix what had happened. No apology, no excuse, could make up for what I had seen. "Sophia," I finally said, my voice quieter than I expected. I took a step forward, but the distance between us felt enormous. "What happened? Why didn't you tell me?" My voice cracked at the end, and I hated that I could feel my emotions slipping out of control. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, tears welling up in her eyes. She wiped them away quickly, as if trying to hold it together, but I could see the pain in her expression. She knew she had crossed a line, and now there was no going back. "I never meant for it to happen this way," she began, her voice trembling. She stood up, but didn't move toward me. "It was just supposed to be one night, a mistake. But then, I don't know. I couldn't stop, and I didn't know how to tell you." Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. One night, a mistake. That was all it had been, just a fleeting moment. But I had seen how she looked at him, the laughter, the comfort between them. It wasn't just a mistake. It was something more. I shook my head, unable to process what she was saying. You didn't think I had a right to know? I asked, my voice rising, the anger I had been holding back now spilling out. You didn't think it was important to tell me that you were seeing someone else behind my back? I'm so sorry, she said, her hands wringing together as she stepped closer. I was scared. I thought if I told you, I'd lose you. And I couldn't lose you. Her voice broke, and she looked down, tears falling freely now. I felt a strange mixture of sympathy and rage. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her it was going to be okay, but I couldn't. Not when everything felt so broken. Not when the trust between us had been shattered. Why didn't you tell me before? I asked again, my voice quieter this time. Why did you let it go on? She stepped back, her hands shaking as she wiped her face. I didn't know how, she whispered. I was trying to end it, but it was too late. And then, I didn't want to hurt you. It was too late. The words echoed in my mind, a reminder of how far things had gone before I had any idea. I could feel the coldness inside me growing. I didn't know who I was angry with more, her or myself for not seeing it sooner. The silence stretched between us, dense and suffocating. I stood there, staring at Sophia, trying to make sense of everything I had just learned. Her eyes were wide, glistening with unshed tears, and I could see the struggle in her expression. How she fought to find the right words, how she fought to make me understand. But there was nothing to understand. The truth was simple, painful, and unchangeable. I had come back to this place expecting to find comfort, to see her face and be reminded of why we were together in the first place. But now, all I felt was emptiness. I looked around the room, taking in the familiar details, the worn-out rug, the books stacked on the coffee table, the faded photographs on the walls. It all felt surreal, like I was trapped in a version of my life that no longer belonged to me. Why didn't you tell me? I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. It came out shakier than I wanted it to, but I didn't care. I needed an answer, even if it made me feel worse. Sophia bit her lip, and for a moment I thought she wouldn't speak. The seconds ticked by, each one heavier than the last. I didn't know how, she said at last, her voice cracking. I didn't know how to tell you, without losing everything. And I didn't want to lose you. I shook my head, disbelief washing over me. You didn't think I deserved to know? You didn't think the truth was more important than protecting your secret. Tears streamed down her face now, her shoulders shaking as she took a step toward me. I was scared, Alex. I was scared of what it would do to us. To you. I was stupid. I thought I could fix it before it got out of hand. But I was wrong, and I hate myself for it. I wanted to scream, to demand that she take back the lies, to undo the betrayal that burned inside me. But the anger was tangled with another, deeper emotion, hurt, and the hurt was suffocating, pressing down on me until it was all I could feel. I turned away from her, staring at the floor, my hands clenching and unclenching at my sides. The silence that followed was sharp, cutting through the tension like a knife. I needed to get out of there. I needed air, distance, anything to stop this ache from spreading. I can't do this, I said, my voice low. I can't be here right now. No, wait, she pleaded, taking another step forward. Please don't go. We can talk about this. We can figure this out. I looked back at her, and for a moment, I saw the desperation in her eyes, the hope that I would stay, that we could find a way through this. But hope felt like a lie now. The life we had was no longer real to me. It was a story I had believed in, but now I saw it for what it really was, shattered and broken. I need time, Sophia, I said, my voice firming as I spoke. I reached for the door, my fingers brushing against the cool metal of the knob. I need to think. I need to be somewhere else. The sound of my own voice startled me. It felt strange, distant, like I was hearing it from someone else's mouth. I opened the door and stepped out, the cool air washing over me as I stepped into the hallway. The noise of the city greeted me. Distant car horns, the hum of morning conversations, the shuffling of feet. Everything felt so normal, so unchanged, but I was different. I was broken, and I didn't know if I could ever piece myself back together. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoing against the walls. Sophia's voice called out after me, but I didn't turn back. I couldn't. If I did, I would see the pain in her face, and I wasn't sure I could take it. The elevator doors slid open, and I stepped inside, pressing the button for the ground floor. The ride was silent. The only sound the soft hum of the machinery as it carried me downward. I stared at my reflection in the polished metal, seeing the exhaustion and hurt in my eyes. My hands were still shaking, and I clenched them tighter, willing the tremors to stop. The doors opened, and I stepped out, the early morning light hitting my face. The world was waking up, the city going about its day, but I felt detached, like I was watching everything unfold from the sidelines. I didn't know where I was going or what I was doing. I just knew I needed to be away, far from the memories and the pain that had made this place unbearable. I walked down the street, the cold air biting at my skin, the early light casting long shadows on the pavement. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it. I didn't need to hear her voice, not now. I couldn't face her, not when the questions I had were so deep, so impossible to answer. Did I love her enough to forgive her? Did I want to? My thoughts were a mess, spinning in all directions. I needed to sort through them, to find some semblance of clarity. I took a deep breath, letting the cold air fill my lungs, and tried to focus on one thing at a time. One step, one breath, one decision. It wasn't going to be easy. I knew that. But for now, I just needed to move forward. The city felt different now. The sun was higher in the sky, its light no longer the soft, early morning glow, but a sharp, unrelenting blaze. I walked without purpose, my feet taking me down streets I knew so well but now felt foreign. The noise around me, the chatter of pedestrians, the distant roar of traffic, it all seemed like a mockery of my shattered world. The morning stretched into noon, and I found myself standing in front of the cafe we used to visit, the one on the corner with the faded awning and the smell of fresh pastries. It felt like a lifetime ago that Sophia and I would sit at one of the small wooden tables, sipping coffee and laughing. The memory was a ghost now, a moment that could never come back. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The cafe was bustling with life. People on laptops, friends chatting, a couple holding hands across a table. It was the kind of place where you could lose yourself in the background, become just another face in the crowd. But I felt out of place, like an intruder in a story that didn't belong to me anymore. "Alex!" I heard a familiar voice call. I looked up, and for a second, hope flared in my chest foolishly before I saw who it was. It was David, one of my old friends from college. He was holding a cup of coffee and looking at me with a mix of surprise and concern. "Hey, man," he said, coming over. "You okay? You don't look okay." I forced a smile, though it felt like my face was cracking. "Yeah, I'm managing." David's eyes narrowed, studying me. He knew me well enough to know when something was off. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked, a genuine note of concern in his voice. I considered it for a moment, the urge to share clawing at me, but I knew I couldn't put it into words, not yet. Not until I understood it myself. I shook my head, the ache in my chest growing. "Not today," I said. "Maybe some other time." He nodded, accepting my answer, though I could tell he wasn't convinced. "All right, man. But you know I'm here, right?" "Thanks, David," I said, feeling a warmth I hadn't expected. I patted him on the shoulder and walked out of the cafe, the door closing softly behind me. I needed to be alone with my thoughts. The streets were still busy, but they felt quieter now, like the city was holding its breath. I wandered aimlessly, the hours blending together as the sky shifted from morning to afternoon. My mind kept drifting back to Sophia, to the way she looked when I walked out, the way her voice cracked when she spoke. The question that haunted me was simple. Could I forgive her? The answer was there, hovering in the back of my mind, but I didn't want to face it. I knew that if I did, it would change everything, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. I found myself at the park near our old apartment, the one where we used to walk when things were good. The sun had moved, casting long shadows over the grass and the winding paths. The sound of children playing and the rustle of leaves in the breeze brought a strange sense of calm. I sat down on a bench, leaning back and closing my eyes, letting the wind brush against my face. Time passed in a blur, but eventually, I opened my eyes and looked around. The park was still the same, untouched by the storm that had swept through my life. The world didn't stop, not for pain, not for broken hearts. It kept moving, indifferent to what I was going through. I stood up and took a deep breath, the air filling my lungs, the cold sharpness grounding me. It was time to make a choice, to stop running from what had happened and face it. Forgiveness wasn't a switch I could flip, and maybe it never would be. But I knew that if I wanted to find peace, I would need to take the first step, however difficult it might be. With a newfound resolve, I pulled out my phone and saw the missed calls and messages from Sophia. I hesitated, finger hovering over the screen, before I took a moment to steady myself. The ache was still there, but so was something else, hope, fragile and small. Maybe, just maybe, we could find a way through this. Maybe I could find a way to heal, even if it took time I didn't know I had. I dialed her number and waited, the ringing echoing in my ear. When she answered, her voice was hesitant, almost scared. "Alex, I'm here," I said, the words feeling heavy, like the first step of a long journey. "Can we talk?" There was silence on the other end, and for a second, I thought she might hang up. But then she whispered, "Yes, I need that too." The road ahead wasn't clear, and it wouldn't be easy. But as I stood there, the sun warming my face, I knew that taking that first step was the only way forward. And for the first time in days, I felt a tiny glimmer of hope. It was enough for now. Sophia's voice was thin, fragile, when she spoke again. "Alex, I've been waiting for you to come back." I took a deep breath, the tension in my chest tightening. "I never left, not really," I said, the words surprising me as they left my mouth. They were true in a way I hadn't realized until now. My body had walked out, but my heart had stayed behind, beating with a hope I'd buried under layers of hurt and betrayal. "I know I don't deserve this," she whispered. I could hear the weight in her voice, the shame that dragged each word down. "I don't deserve another chance, but I have to tell you, Alex, I never wanted to hurt you. I was scared, and I made choices I can't take back." "I know," I said, the simple admission tasting bittersweet. "I know, and I don't know if I can forgive you. Not yet. But I do know that I'm tired of running from what we had." The silence between us was not cold, but raw. It was the kind of silence that makes you hold your breath, waiting for the next step, for the storm to break, or the first drop of rain to fall. But we stood there, neither moving, neither speaking, just feeling. For a moment, I could almost believe that time had stopped, as if the world was giving us this one moment to decide, to understand what came next. I looked at Sophia, seeing her not as the person who broke my trust, but as the woman I once loved, who still carried pieces of that person in her. The woman who had once stood with me under the wide, open sky, sharing hopes and dreams. The woman who made me feel like I wasn't alone. "I don't know what will be in the end," I said, voice low and hesitant. "But I know I don't want to lose you without trying." The relief in her eyes was almost enough to make me forget the pain. Almost. But we both knew that forgiveness was not a single act. It was a journey, one that would take time, effort, and the courage to face the past head-on. It would take more than apologies. It would take rebuilding one step at a time. "Then we start from here," she said, her voice steady now, no longer trembling. Together, I nodded, though the weight in my chest still lingered. There were no promises, no guarantees. But there was a choice, and that was enough for now. The past couldn't be changed, but we still had control over what came next. I reached out, and for the first time in days, I felt her hand in mine, familiar, warm, and full of unspoken words. "Maybe this is how we begin again," I said, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I smiled. It was small, cautious, but real. It wasn't the end, and it wasn't the beginning we'd wanted, but it was the only one we had left. And that was enough. As we stood there, fingers intertwined, the world around us began to move again. The noise of the city, the rustle of leaves, the hum of distant conversations. But it no longer felt like a roar. It felt like the quiet promise of a new day, one we would face together, one step at a time.